Oh, shucks, thanks. Well, hello, everybody. My name is Chris Masson. I am the General Manager, Executive Director, Proprietor, Chief Cook and Bottle Washer down at the Gristmill Gardens in Karamias. I'm sure quite a few of you have been there before, or maybe have been at one of my other talks here in the past where I've talked about the work that we're doing at the Gristmill. Now, before I get into the details of what I'm talking about today, I want to let you know why I'm talking about this. The real reason that I'm going to be talking about what I'm talking about is because what drew me to the Gristmill was to be able to talk to people about where their food comes from. We have the only working water wheel powered flour mill in all of Western Canada. We have 6 acres of farmland. We have a unique opportunity to grow things, to make things, and to teach people where their food actually comes from. It used to be the case that everything you got was local. Everything you ate would have come from not far away. Today, who knows where most of these things actually come from? It doesn't even really matter to us, does it? We just have them, we eat them, we enjoy them, and that's it. So, I was casting about for a project, because I love projects. I don't have hobbies, I have projects. And my current project that I am actually literally starting this week is to spend the next 2 years and to make a cheeseburger from scratch. Now, I don't mean just, put together a cheeseburger. That's not so hard, right? Every ingredient in it will come through my own labors. Now, I have to do a few substitutions. There's a few things I just can't do in this part of the world, like have black pepper, unfortunately. But in the end, this is going to take me 2 years, about $8,000, and is going to involve 3 cows for my one cheeseburger. So this is going to be a really interesting project. So I want to sort of go through some of, how we got here, and the realization that I had almost right away, looking at the logistics of it all and realizing that although there were cheeseburgers 100 years ago, you can't go back any farther than that. By the time you get to 120 years ago, 130 years ago, a lot of the things that we rely on to make a cheeseburger possible didn't exist. The conditions weren't right. If you tried to make a cheeseburger, people would be wondering why you're being so wasteful, why you're on such a fool's errand. Cheeseburgers they're foundational to our idea of convenience food, of fast food, of maybe not great for you, but indulgent food. And they're huge business too. If you sort of step back from cheeseburgers and look at burgers generally, there were 40 billion of them consumed in the United States alone last year. 40 billion. Now, if you take the population of the United States, that means 125 burgers a person a year. A lot of people are getting the 2 cheeseburger meal. But this is huge. The cheeseburger now sits as one of the main, examples of a regional food. There's nothing more American than a cheeseburger. That, pasta, pizza, there are only a few foods that worldwide now come to represent particular parts of the world in quite that way. People absolutely love them. Where do burgers come from? Where do cheeseburgers come from? Well, if we really want to start in the right place, we've got to start with this guy, Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan and his huge cavalry, as they were invading, they often didn't stop for meals. They would kill often a pony or 2 a day. One pony could feed about 100 soldiers. They would take the meat, they would chop it up, and they would stick it under their saddles so that the movement of the horse and the body heat of the horse would actually cook the meat. And they would eat it on the go. Two generations later, his grandson, Kublai Khan, ended up invading Moscow and leaving behind a little something they later called steak tartare, which was chopped raw beef. While the Russians, continuing to go forward in time, end up making their way to Germany, particularly Hamburg. Hamburg was a major port, sometimes called the Russian port, and steak tartare was left there. Well, Hamburg, of course, was a major point of departure in the 17th and 18th century to come to the United States. If you were coming from Northern Europe, chances are, if you were taking the boat to America, you were leaving from Hamburg. So many of the immigrants coming from all over Northern Europe spent some time in Hamburg, got to try these Hamburg steaks or hamburger steaks and brought the idea with them to New York. And so very early on in old menus, we find Hamburg steak on the menu, which is barely cooked ground beef, often with onions, often with breadcrumbs in it. And this becomes actually quite popular and starts to spread. Now, we don't know exactly when that turned into the hamburger that we think of today, or hamburger sandwich as it used to be called. We do know that it was probably a convenience move to take that Hamburg steak that would have been sitting on a plate, maybe with a raw egg on top of it, and to put it between two slices of bread to make it more convenient. So it's very likely that it was at a carnival or some kind of activity like that. And there are several different theories on who did it first, and it really doesn't matter. What really matters is that the thought was in the ether. People were experimenting. They were trying to make these Hamburg steaks more handleable. But what we do know is that by 1904, at the St. Louis World's Fair, the hamburger, as we know it, pretty much, is for sale. And not only that, one of its main condiments also joins the public interest, which is yellow mustard. The St. Louis World's Fair in 1904 is the first instance we know of yellow mustard as a condiment for hot dogs. No doubt that it was going to make its way to that hamburger very, very soon afterwards, if it hadn't already. So that's just a little bit of the history of where the idea of a hamburger came from. It was a convenience food, for sure. Meanwhile, all sorts of other things are happening at the same time in the United States to make this even more possible. Things like refrigeration. Instead of just having ice boxes in your house not being able to transport goods very far, you started to get train cars that were outfitted with refrigeration. Boats outfitted with refrigeration. Later on, when they figured out how to miniaturize the refrigeration systems, the ammonia refrigeration systems, you could put them on trucks. And suddenly you didn't need to be where your beef was. The beef could go anywhere. But of course, with this system expanding and lots more cattle showing up and being processed into all sorts of products, there started to be concern over the welfare of these cattle. I would recommend that you go find the book, The Jungle. It was written almost exactly 100 years ago. And it was written as a novel, but that detailed the horrors in slaughterhouses at the time. As a direct result of that book, there ended up being massive changes to the inspection regime and the control systems involved in processing beef. Made a huge improvement, all because of that one novel. Now, that's sort of a little brief history. Today, cheeseburgers are everywhere. Back in the 1980s, there was what they called the Cheeseburger Wars, where all the different fast food outlets battled for supremacy, and McDonald's did pretty well at the time. It's losing ground now, but still, there was literally a fast food place on every corner. It's a long way away from one person at a carnival trying to figure out how you could eat a Hamburg steak easily. Well, let's talk about what actually goes into a cheeseburger. Well, obviously, the first thing that goes into a cheeseburger is the bun. That's what we think of today. We don't put it between two pieces of Texas toast. We don't do anything else like that. We put it in a nice bun. Well, to make that bun isn't so hard. We've been doing baking for thousands of years. You take wheat and you process it into flour in a mill like our mill. Got to show ourselves off. Grind it up, and you have flour. You take that flour, you mix salt and water, and if you can buy it, if you have it available, prepackaged yeast, and you have bread. It's just that simple. Now, that particular bun that you made with just those four ingredients isn't actually going to be quite what you're used to as a hamburger bun, because you want a bun that's softer and moister and is a little bit sweeter and has more flavor. So your bun is going to have more than those four ingredients. It's going to have sugar in it. It's going to have more fat in it to make it soft and supple and not dry out as fast. There's going to be preservatives put into it today. That's very important. And you're going to do all of these things just to make the bun. To make that bun in a time period, you're looking at close to a year. Because you've got to plant the seed, you've got to harvest it, you've got to thresh it, you've got to grind it, You've got to do all of these various things. From beginning to end, you're looking at about a year. Now, some of the ingredients, like the wheat, well, we grew a lot of it here. In fact, there was more wheat being grown in the Okanagan 120, 140 years ago than there was on the prairies, which most people don't realize. So we got the wheat. Where are we going to get our salt from, though? Not a lot of rock salt around here. Do you go down to the coast and get some salt water from the ocean and evaporate it? If so, you're looking at about 5 gallons of salt water to get 2 cups of salt. And that's a lot of salt to have to drag up here because it's not going to evaporate very fast down on the coast. So just to make this bun is actually pretty time consuming. And we haven't even gotten any of the other parts yet. Now next, we need our cows. I mentioned at the very beginning that it's going to take me 3 cows to make a cheeseburger. For those of you keeping track, that's because I need 1 cow for the beef. I need a different cow for milk. I need a dairy cow. And on top of that, I need a calf for the enzyme that's in its 4th stomach. It's called rennet. You might have heard of it. And it's used to make cheese. We'll come back to cheese in a minute. But suffice to say, I can't use the same animal for all 3 of those things. That's 3 separate animals. Now, if I've got a beef cow, I'm raising it. I'm doing all the husbandry, I'm taking good care of it. Eventually it goes to slaughter. I'm going to have to store that meat for a certain period of time. We like our beef aged, gives it more flavor. We need to figure out how to store it with either refrigeration or freezing. Then we've got to figure out how to grind it. We've got to add various ingredients like binders. Most hamburger patties that you're used to have a binder in them, whether it's breadcrumbs, whether it's oatmeal, whether it's things like that, to help it stick together, otherwise it might crumble when it's being cooked. Your various spices are going to be thrown in as well. And again, some of those spices, like black pepper, weren't necessarily easy to get your hands on 130, 140 years ago. Certainly not around here. So cheese. I'd mentioned briefly that we need 2 cows for cheese. So first we need milk. We need to milk a cow. So we need to raise it and we need to milk it. Well, then the process to make cheese is basically to take that milk and to curdle it in a controlled way. We want to curdle it so that all the proteins that are in it come out and become a solid. And once we've done that, usually with enzymes like rennet or acid will also do that to some degree as well. You can make some kinds of cheeses with an acid. So vinegar in your milk will do that. But what we want is cheddar cheese. We want to have that flavor. We want to have that texture. We want to have that color. Well, does milk look that color? No. Cheddar cheese is actually colored with a dye from a plant called annatto. It's a spice from Central America. And if you've ever had the red paste chicken on a street corner in Mexico, you know what annatto tastes like. Well, it provides a brilliant color and makes this look different than other cheeses. I prefer white cheddar myself. I don't need the extra coloring, but it is a natural coloring. It's not a dye. Like, it's not an artificial dye. So with cheddar cheese, we're gonna make our curd. We're going to then heat it up a little bit more, because what happens is that when the cheese curdles, it's kind of like Jell-O. It's actually quite thin. But as you cut it and as you warm it up, the proteins start to squeeze and release the liquid that's inside. And it gets more and more solid the longer and longer you cook it, until eventually you end up with cheese curds of the kind that you can buy in the store or get put on poutine or what have you, right? So this is it before any of that process. Now the liquid that comes out, the yellowish liquid on the side there, that's whey. So there you go, curds and whey. No way, you say. Now the really cool thing is that whey actually still has a bunch of proteins in it, just a different kind of protein. Not the casein that we've already gotten out of it, which makes the cheese that we can turn into mozzarella or cheddar or all that. But the protein that's in there is the same protein that's in egg whites. And so we can get it out too, and that's what ricotta cheese is. If you were ever wondering, and now maybe you weren't, but now you know. You can impress your friends at parties. So the reason cheddar cheese is called cheddar cheese is because those curds have been taken and cheddared, which is a particular kind of cutting and stacking and squeezing more of the moisture out of them. Then they'll be put into a press, turned into bricks, and let age. And the longer you age a cheddar, the more bitter and strong the flavor is, and lots of people love that. Absolutely adore that. It also starts to crystallize. Now, some people will say, oh, great, but why do we have to kill a poor little calf just to get a bit of its stomach to make the cheese? That's awfully inconsiderate. Well, that was the way that we did it back then. You can curdle other ways, but it doesn't result in the same effect. Stinging nettle, for example, has enzymes in it that actually do work pretty good at making cheese. You can make a vegetarian cheese. Problem is, it doesn't age well. The proteins don't evolve in quite the same way, and an aged cheddar made with the vegetarian enzymes doesn't taste right. It doesn't taste good, actually. But we're starting to figure out now that we can get bacteria to make the same kind of enzymes, and that we don't have to kill any more calves. We can get it from a bacterial source, but that involves genetic engineering, and some people don't like that. So, anyways, none of that was available 100, 120, 140 years ago. Instead, we're using calf stomachs to make our cheese. Now, we've got cheese, we've got a patty, we've got a bun. Now we need to start thinking about the things that are going to go on top of it too, like lettuce and tomato. Well, this particular kind of lettuce is really interesting to me. This kind of lettuce was actually grown by Thomas Jefferson at his estate, Montecito. And it's a kind of lettuce called tennis ball lettuce. I'm growing it at the grist mill this year. What makes this lettuce special is that it is a pickling lettuce. You actually put it in brine. It fits nicely into mason jars, and you can then have lettuce year-round. A little salty, a little vinegary, but hey, who cares? At least you've got crisp lettuce year-round. Now that's really important because I don't know if you've got a garden at home, but good luck in this climate at having lettuce and tomatoes at the same time of year. By the time your tomatoes are ready, your lettuce is all bolted and is pretty unhappy, right? You have a logistical challenge to put lettuce and tomato from your own garden on one burger. So the way I'm going to deal with that with my 2-year project is by pickling the lettuce. Then I can pull it off the shelf anytime I want. It'll make the burger a little bit different, but that's part of the learning experience. There are kinds of lettuce that don't bolt as fast, they don't go to seed, they won't get bitter in the heat, but we didn't have access to as many of those back then. The lettuces that we did have were very seasonal. And so our cheeseburger is going to have to be pretty seasonal too. Onions, of course. You got to have sliced onion on a cheeseburger. Pickles, of course. Now the nice thing about pickles is that I'll make them this year. They can sit in the jar and be ready for the cheeseburger next year. But think about everything that has to go into that jar besides just the cucumbers. The vinegar's got to go in. Well, part of my project is going to be making the vinegar from scratch. And then all the things that go in to make the flavoring, the garlic, the mustard seed, the dill, anything else that I want in there, I've got to grow so that I can put it in. That's why it's a two-year project, because I actually need 2 seasons to do it, 2 growing seasons. What else do we have? Ketchup. Who doesn't love ketchup? My wife looks at me in great horror every time I put a huge amount of ketchup on my fish and chips. She's like, tartar sauce. She's in team tartar sauce, not me. I'm in team ketchup. All over my cod, all over my fries. That's just me. It's the perfect combination of sweet and tangy. I mean, what an amazing condiment, right? Except what we think of as ketchup today is not what ketchup started off as. Ketchup actually started off as a kind of fish sauce in Southeast Asia. And it was in the Malay region where British colonists were first introduced to this savory fish sauce. They were so intrigued by it that they took it back with them to the UK and started to play around with it, making all sorts of other kinds of ketchup. For example, mushroom ketchup. Walnut ketchup. You can still find lots of recipes online if you look for walnut ketchup. It wasn't until about 120 years ago that tomato ketchup really even became a thing, and it was the Heinz family that made a lot of that happen practically. Ketchup doesn't seem so difficult. That's the sugar, that's vinegar, that's salt, that's tomatoes. Oh wait. There's a lot of other things in there too. Paprika, allspice, mustard, celery seeds, cinnamon. I'm going to have a real problem trying to get a lot of those ingredients here in the Similkameen Valley. You know, a lot of the spices that are in it are part of the Great British Empire, being able to take advantage of this incredible network of distribution that they had, being able to bring in all these things from the colonies that would have been incredibly hard, not impossible, but hard to get here, and even harder in the Similkameen Valley back when our mill was built. If you had them, they were precious. They were not throwaway ingredients at all. So if I'm going to make one from scratch, I have to forego all of these and find suitable substitutes to get some of the same warm, comforting flavors. Fortunately, cumin grows very well here, and that is an often ingredient in ketchup. Celery seed won't be a problem. I just have to let my celery bolt and go to seed. Mustard also isn't a problem, although mustard seeds are kind of tricky on one level because mustard is very weedy. I don't want it to really get out and get everywhere. But at least when I grow the mustard seed, I can also make mustard. In fact, I've already made mustard, just not with my own seeds yet. You know, mustard is basically ground up mustard seeds, so you get the powder. Now, to get a good powder, you have to remove some of the oil, so that involves, you know, various processes to remove some of the mustard oil. But we'll take that mustard powder, we'll add vinegar, we'll add salt. That gives us a very base mustard. Now, the mustard that we want on our cheeseburger is probably yellow mustard, so we got to grow turmeric and put that in too. That's what gives it that bright yellow color. There's lots of other kinds of mustard we could make. We could make sweet Bavarian mustards, we could make Chinese style mustards, but we're going to try and stick with yellow mustard. But again, yellow mustard has a lot of those warm spices in it. It's hidden in it. You don't think about it. So again, we're going to have to improvise a bit. There's two main varieties of mustard out there. If you ever grow mustard greens in your backyard, if you get them from a seed catalog, they're almost always black mustard, which is a Chinese variety of mustard. It's quite a bit spicier. So when you want a hot mustard, a really hot mustard, it's the black mustard seeds that you want. But for a yellow mustard, like French's, things like that, you want the white mustard, or yellow mustard as it's called, which is the other kind. Now that actually proved to be really hard to find seed for. Although it's grown on a commercial scale, it's not a backyard thing, generally speaking. The only time you'd grow white mustard in your own backyard is if you were looking for weed control, because it's really good at preventing weeds from sprouting. So I managed to find it as a cover crop, but I'll still be able to grow it, harvest the seeds, and do what I need to do. I wasn't expecting that little problem, but it turns out almost all the mustard out there to buy is black mustard. And you might not know this, but the mustard plant actually has a lot of very close relatives. In fact, they're all the same species. Kohlrabi, kale, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, cauliflower. The list actually goes on from there. They're all the same species. They were just selected through breeding to highlight different characteristics. So kohlrabi focuses on the stem, you get the nice big stem. Kale, it's the leaves, so on and so forth. Bet you didn't know that. I've actually got to keep the mustard away from all of these plants because they all attract the same kind of insects and they can crossbreed very easily. So if I want to save seed from broccoli at the end of the year, the mustard's got to be far enough away that they won't cross-pollinate. Another little problem. Good thing I've got lots of land. Now next, mayonnaise. We've got our ketchup, we've got our mustard, we need our mayonnaise. Well, mayonnaise, at its base, is really, really simple. You take egg yolks, and then you start adding oil and you whisk it. That's it. That's mayonnaise. That's all that it is. It doesn't taste at all like egg yolks and oil, does it? Well, it's because to make sure that it blends really well, we often add a little bit of lemon juice or a little bit of vinegar. It helps it stay emulsified. And so it stays, creamy and consistent. Well, most mayonnaises that you actually buy in the store have other flavorings in them as well. Often mustard is put in, a little bit of mustard is put into the mayonnaise, for example. And read the label next time you look. It'll say spices and things like that. But mayonnaise at its base root is nothing but egg yolk and oil. An oil that doesn't have too much flavor, like an olive oil or a canola oil would be good. And it's just a lot of whisking. Just put your oil in really slowly. Downside of having it be that simple without a lot of salt or other things in it is that it doesn't last very long. Mayonnaise goes bad fast. You know, if a potato salad's going to kill you, it's probably the mayonnaise that's gone off. So we have to make that at the last minute. That is not something, 120, 130, 140 years ago that I could have made, months in advance and packaged up and sent out. That's something that would have to be made pretty much on the spot. But again, we've gone through the bun, the pickles, the tomatoes, the onions, the lettuce, the condiments flying on either side, the patty, the cheese. All of this all adds up to a little package of incredible convenience that we think of as one of the most basic foods there is. Something that has a ton of calories for its price. We talk about an efficient food. And a whole bunch of work it had to go into it. The amount of expertise into each of the ingredients is incredible. 120, 130, 140 years ago, people would have scratched their heads and looked at you. Silly. Why would you put all of those things together? Why would you put all that labor into this one little thing? And today we take it for granted because things can be preserved. Things can be held on to for a long period of time. We have systems now that will actually pick the tomatoes out of a field, and less than 3 hours later will be ketchup in a bottle. Talk about efficient. How far we've come from having to slave over a stove for hours to reduce it, to get it to that right consistency. To know to put xanthan gum in our ketchup to make it really thick. I mean, they do that on purpose, by the way. The whole can't get it out of the bottle, they do that on purpose. I mean, cheeseburgers are part of our culture. And hopefully now you've learned a little bit about them. And hopefully this year and next you're going to come and visit me at the grist mill and see me in action as I'm making these darn cheeseburgers. And hopefully it's a project that all works out. So anyways, thank you very much for your time.